One is it's not. This becomes even more difficult then to support young men and women who are trying to break away from, take decisions, marry out of choice, and get out of those caste and religious confines. I work, as Urvashi said, I work with an organization called Ali, Association for Advocacy and Legal Initiatives, based in Lucknow, that has been for the last 15 years working on the issue of right to choice in sexual relationships. And we've find that when women get out of, try breaking these barriers, they face a lot of violence. I mean, from the extent of being illegally detained, to not being allowed to having to discontinue studies, having criminal cases filed against their partners, them, and the whole effort is somehow or the other try to get the girl back to change her statement and protect the honor. Now that becomes extremely difficult to deal with. Like I said, you're attacked yourself when you're dealing with cases like this. And the experience of Ali is that I think this whole bogey of religious conversion for marriage needs to be attacked, because in our experience, it is actually the state promoting religious conversions, because it is much easier. You have a one-day marriage if you convert and marry. Whether you have a nikah or you get married under Hindu customs, you can marry in a day. Whereas if you get into the secular law, it's a cumbersome process, it is time-consuming, and the notice is sent to your guardians. So then what is it? Then you are actually being, so what is the whole bogey of conversion to marry? There is no choice left. And in communities like in UP, you don't have the choice of not to marry, because that is the only protection. That marriage certificate is your protection against false cases, against a case of rape, against being, enables you to get bail. And if these are not, this has to be actually taken head on, that why is the state promoting? If I can get married within a day under, in a religious ceremony, why can't I do so in a secular ceremony, so where I don't need to convert? I also like to submit that, these kinds of steps that are being taken, this whole scenario that's being created, it is creating a lot of problems for women groups at the grassroots level. There you have, as it is, the state machinery, you have to hear things like, without this on your head, having to hear things like, if you take these steps, you will have to suffer consequences. But now they are emboldened. And this whole hysteria of they are taking away our daughters, they are raping our daughters, we want lynch justice. And like Kavita said, there's no scope for women to speak out. And if the girl does speak and she says she's consented, then the whole bogey of women lie about violence is promoted. And that is another thing that you're constantly being tackled when you deal with cases of sexual abuse, that women lie. And this, and in the end, I like to conclude by saying this needs to be contrasted with the situation in Muzaffarnagar, during the Muzaffarnagar riots, where there were cases of rape. And it's very difficult, as everybody knows, to report cases of rape in general, and more so in cases of riot. And the entire discourse of the community that was accused of rioting and accused of raping in riots says, we don't rape. That was the whole entire, and this was said to us constantly by not only them, but also the administration that believed that this community has, they say we never have a history of rape, which is a little laughable, because we know where the community is situated and the past history. So it becomes a very, very difficult and tight situation for women to be working with this whole entire discourse of manhood and our women being taken away from us. Thank you.
Thanks, Seema. It strikes me, listening to the two of you, I was thinking there was a time when we were so concerned in the women's movement about the state's intrusion into the private sphere. How far should we allow the state to come into the home, to look at personal relationships, and so on and so forth. What seems to be happening here is a different kind of intrusion, which is much more insidious, by non-state actors, by extra-legal sort of people who appropriate a certain kind of power to themselves. And then because it comes under the garb of religion, and because religion is already so much part of the private sphere, it's like it's much more difficult to counter in that way. You know, and all the arguments about should you allow the state in and should you not allow the state in are premised on some kind of equation between the state and the citizen, where the lines are actually quite clear. But where religious actors are concerned, those lines, they're already in the center of your lives, doing all sorts of things, and it's very difficult to counter that. Okay, now we'll move on to Akshay's presentation. You're going to go there? Yes. Okay.
What I'm going to share is some thoughts which are kind of slowly coming together in a paper, and it's called Ab Tak Chhappan, and the larger wordy title is Modi's Body and the Social Psychology of the Political Economy. Uh, maybe it should be like 56 words. But it's a reference to two things. One is, I think it was a 2007 film, Ab Tak Chhappan, which was about a police, an encounter specialist in Bombay who had killed 56 people thus far. So it's 56 so far. And the second reference, which is, which one wonders how it came about, is a statement that Modi made in the run-up to the elections early this year, saying that what India needs, I actually was talking specifically about Uttar Pradesh, is his 56-inch chest. So this entire image of this large chest, this masculine, strong man, etc., acts as juxtaposed to the effeminate Manmohan Singh kind of image. And there's something that is happening, something very, very radical and fundamental that is happening to Indian politics, which is what I want to reflect on. I want to start not with Modi, but with a moment, with the 31st of October, 1984, which is a morning where my mother woke me up, very frantic and crying and saying, they've killed her, they've killed her. I did not have to ask who she was talking about. It was clear that it was Indira Gandhi that had been killed, because the intensity of that emotion that my mother presented, there could only be one her. Now this was a few years later, of course, and this happens at night. My mother wakes me up and says, they've killed him, and it's obviously Rajiv. Right? There is this continuity between the mother and the son, and then we are anath. We are somehow orphaned. This was a time when what it meant to be a citizen was to have a relationship with a particular figure. Indira was the mother. To be a citizen was to be a child of that mother. And of course, this is a broad, very grand generalization, which must be taken apart in terms of class, caste, etc., etc. But that was the psychic structure, the social psychology of citizenship itself. Now, thereafter, I think we saw the blooming of coalition politics. We saw the evacuation of that central place that held together the experience of the nation, the experience of what it means to be a citizen. Right? We see, there hasn't been one single leader. Of course, there was Atal Bihari, but that was never that figure, that solitary single figure that has eliminated everything else, that has risen above the law, above politics, has transcended the everydayness of our vulnerabilities, etc., etc., until we arrive at Modi. Now, we need a very, very nuanced and serious examination of the processes through which this has happened, and that must involve an understanding of political economy. It must include the way in which our lives have been mediatized, and the way in which the media itself is controlled politically, etc. So there's a lot to examine in order to understand how we arrived at a point where once again, to be a citizen is to have a certain kind of relationship, a certain kind of passionate attachment with one figure. And this figure has a 56-inch chest. This figure is the aggressive, masculine, new Hindu male. There's something quite scary about this. A few weeks, I think it was 3 weeks before the general elections actually started, there was something quite striking that took place in the BJP's campaign. All the publicity material was changed in the span of a few days. From Ab Ki Baar Bhajpa Sarkar, it became Ab Ki Baar Modi Sarkar. Modi eliminated transcended not simply politics, he eliminated the party as well. Now, there are various ways in which the formation we have now resonates with the way we've seen fascism in the context of Mussolini, the specific fascism in Italy. And of course, it's not, I think we do ourselves a misjustice by saying that India is going through fascism right now. There's something quite specific about this. But there is something useful in examining the key elements of fascism that rolled out in Italy and what is happening right now. Firstly, we have the centrality of a charismatic figure which is above the law. Secondly, there is a close nexus between that charismatic figure and capitalism, and a certain imagination of the way the political economy should be structured. Thirdly, there is the very strong articulation of the idea of the normative citizen, what it means to be a citizen. And this is the process through which there is both the exclusion and the possibilities of inclusion into that body. There is an imperative of inclusion. But most crucially to me is the imperative of a love for that charismatic leader, is the imperative of a passionate attachment to that charismatic leader. The week that post May 16th, which is a really big event, when the general election results were out, there was a very peculiar article in the Open magazine, which several of you all may have come across, which was it was called Modi's Hotness Quotient, right? And many people, and this is like circulating on Facebook, and people are like, "Oh my God, how gross," etc., etc. You know, that kind of horror with which one says, "Oh my God, how can you find Modi hot? How can you find Modi sexy?" But there's some, a very big element of truth in that entire thing. What is the figure of Modi? What does that represent? What is contained in that 56-inch chest, and what does it radiate outside? What are the imperatives of attachment to that body that are generated by that body? Today, of course, we see, and on a weekly basis almost, there's, I'm constantly amazed by the way this entire narrative is unfurling before our eyes, because there's new spaces, new articulations that I myself had not imagined, and possibly others have, but for me it's always, there's been a series of striking things. The most troubling was the Teachers' Day fiasco, where the Ministry of Human Resource Development, HRD, comes up with an imperative to all educational institutions, to all schools, that between the period of 3 and 5 on Teachers' Day, September the 5th, all students must be in schools, that there must be televisions so that they can watch, they can interact with the leader, with Modi. Now this is it's not simply an appropriation of a long-standing thing. And as a teacher, I was like, you made this personal now, that kind of feeling, where he becomes the teacher. He implicates himself, he writes himself into all relationships of authority in society, right? So that structural relationship between something like the family or something like the teacher-student relationship, etc., is becoming a variation of that relationship with that leader. Right? So if we look at the ways in which this figure is rising in different spaces and modifying those relationships, or attempting to modify, I don't think they can be, not in their totality, but are being modified in that sense, where the figure of Modi is being written into all these relationships, I think has to be understood. To sum up that part of it, there's a certain erotic equation that is, or rather there are various erotic equations that bind us to, in relationships with people in society. And Modi is writing himself into each of those erotic equations, and that has to be addressed. The second thing I want to talk about is the rise of, how this relates to the rise of the new Hindu man. Again, it was 2007 when Amitabh Bachchan appeared on a short kind of film. I think it was the Times Group, which was about the new pulsating India. I mean, the metaphor of the pulsating penis of the penetrating, powerful, I need another P word there. Right, where he's talking about, he says, there are two Indias in this country. One India is straining at the leash, waiting to jump out into the world and show this is what we are capable of, etc. And the world is waiting, is watching, etc., etc. The other India is the leash. Right? This entire frame of the only, what India should be, right, is in the image of this Hindu masculinity, which is no more suffering from emasculation. I mean, earlier we had this entire argument of the way in which Hindutva has risen is through, creating the fear of emasculation and, generating the sense of the Muslim other as the emasculating other, etc., etc. And therefore, this is the recuperation of masculinity, as Thomas Blom Hansen famously said. But it's no more a recuperation of masculinity. The Hindu male has arrived. The Hindu male is exercising privilege, is experiencing privilege, and that is the space of the Hindu nation, of the very notion of development, etc. There's two more points that I wanted to make. I'm going to make them very quickly. One is the entire question of the empty ideology of development. Now, the election was won in the name of development. The absolutely striking thing was that not once did Modi or the BJP have to explain what they meant by development. Right? Not once. And of course, now we see, I mean, it was quite obvious that what was going to happen given how the campaign was funded, etc. And the first things they do is amend labor laws, get into the Land Acquisition Act, water down environmental impact assessment processes, etc., etc., paving the way for special economic zones, for the handing out the distribution of the resources of this country to different capitalist hands. The closing down of the planning commission, the space where state-centered relationships were contested, where states competed with where those contestations of decentralization, etc., took place. Now, this ideology of development was very much about, it's not a saffron agenda. It's not about Hindutva, etc., etc. That was what, and if you look at the symbol of the lotus in the run-up to the election, it was white. It was not saffron. But if you look a little closer, you see that the background was saffron. So on the day of the election, there's a giggly Barkha Dutt interviewing Uma Bharati and asking a question as though this is the critical, difficult question. I'm going to be the difficult journalist, and says some people are saying that this is going to be a government that is going to be controlled by remote control by the RSS. What do you say to that? And Uma Bharati just laughs, and she says, RSS ko remote control ki zarurat hi nahi hai. It does not need a remote control because we are the RSS. And she laughs, and Barkha laughs with her. This was one of those most striking moments of here. This is the RSS ideology coming out into play. This is an RSS government. So We have to understand what is happening with ideology. How is it that the notion of development is so empty that how has it become an empty signifier? Such that it's not simply that, earlier we used to say that development is an anti-politics machine, right? Now we're saying that, that development cannot be political anymore. It's almost as though it has been necessarily been made apolitical. To talk the actual questions of development has suddenly become a problem. The last point I want to say is this relates to a reflection on something he said in his Grand Madison Square speech, where he says, if I could destroy, अगर मैं हर दिन एक कानून को खत्म कर सकूं, मैं सबसे खुश आदमी हूँगा. If I can destroy one law every single day, I will be the happiest person. And that is precisely what is happening. What does that say in terms of the relationship between the leader and law? And this refers us to a long-standing debate between Hans Kelsen and Carl Schmitt about who protects the Constitution. Is the leader above the Constitution? Is the leader above the law? And I'm afraid that is where we have arrived. Can I just take one more minute? Yeah. So what do we do? Big question. We need to focus on understanding how the rhetoric, the social psyche of masculinity in this way articulates in terms of everyday political economy, in terms of everyday development practices, in terms of development projects, etc., etc. Second is to emphasize that our challenge is the reimagination of politics, and those processes are happening, where politics is not about the leader, but is about us. Right? And I think the Aam Aadmi Party in its early, that's the kind of sentiment that I got from several autowalas. Politics is not about who you know, it's not about knowing the local congressia. Right? Rajniti ab ghar ghar ki baat ho gayi hai. That's a very different sentiment, different imagination of politics. That is what we need to nurture. And finally, I think it's crucial that we work on humor. It is crucial that we enable in the public sphere the humiliation of the figure of the leader. That 56-inch chest must be laughed at. I think that is imperative at this moment.
Thanks a lot, Akshay. That was completely fascinating, and you had everyone riveted, as you can see. I have before we open it up, we've got lots of time, actually. We've got a good half hour for discussion, unusually, because all the speakers have been very good about keeping to their time. I just want to ask, I want to put a question to you, and I want to ask the three of you if you have anything to respond to in each other's presentations. And my question to you, Akshay, is you mentioned this relationship between the leader and the citizens as on a sort of almost like a benevolent parent-child relationship. I mean, what is it among us that actually makes this such a potent and powerful and attractive? I mean, why do people so easily jump into it? Maybe you might like to reflect on that a little bit. But let's see if each of you has anything. Do you have any questions for each other or something?
Sorry. I just actually, I found your presentation extremely interesting. But the thing that, and clearly you were talking about the figure of Modi, and you talked about leadership and a model of politics that would not be about adoring the leader, but about participation. My concern is, I think, that when I spoke also, was I think precisely about the fact that I don't think that Modi's politics is only about adoring the leader. It is about, it is able to actually mobilize a notion of participative citizenship that is, however, posed in ways where the participation becomes about, as I said, about protecting women, about protecting the cow vote, protecting the nation, whatever it is. But it is actually giving you something to do. And there I feel that there, when you talked about and that is the concern in my mind, which I had shared. And it comes back to that in the notion of the for instance, in the politics of, you mentioned the Aam Aadmi Party at the end, and I feel that the notion of citizenship there also, participative citizenship also being of a certain kind of masculine model, where and not really challenging that, a notion of Swaraj where basically women figure in terms of oh, you will get the chance to say no to liquor outlets, but otherwise a sense of having the right to define your autonomy and actually define that is somewhere sort of wiped out of the equation. And therefore I feel that in fact you're not able to pose, we are being unable to pose a notion of participative citizenship that actually challenges the kind of participative citizenship that the RSS is building.
Do you want to respond to that?
Oh, okay. On why this structure is attractive, I think there's various routes that we can draw. I know that Dilip Menon argues that these are longer standing structures of kingship, right? And the relationship between kingship and kinship as the as structuring the political economy, etc. That's one argument that I think needs to be taken seriously. Secondly, it's there is we continue to have we continue to be post-colonial. There is the history of a nationalist movement which is always remembered in terms of leaders. But thirdly, I think, and this is crucial for the current moment, and that's why I was making the reference to media. There's Bollywood and there's cricket. I seriously do not think that the phenomenon of Modi would have been possible without either Amitabh Bachchan or Sachin Tendulkar. These are both figures that are above the fray. Sachin is called God. The possibility of imagining another human as being above the fray is chiseled into our consciousness on an everyday basis through our consumption of popular culture. So that's why we need to look at the social psychology of political economy and not simply focus on Modi. I think we need to understand Modi in order to understand the broader problem of, or rather the broader challenge to a more meaningful democratic structure, which brings me to reflect on Kavita's point. Yes, it is about everyone is now part of the project of the nation. That is the call. Now participate in my idea, etc., etc. In order to do that, one takes on becomes a variant of the same image of Modi. So when he talks in his first speech, when on May 16th itself, in the parliament, where he says, this election is dedicated to sab yuvakon ko, right? And then he adds an and then says, or hamari maa behnon ko, the women, our mothers and sisters who have been craving for protection, right? So there's a difference between that body, which is going to carry out the work of this nation, of this new nation, and that body is to be created in the figure of Modi. And I'm not again. It's difficult to to articulate this in specifics always. The second point is that when we're talking about the Aam Aadmi Party and at a local kind of level, it's not just participatory democracy. It's an experiment with deliberative democracy and direct democracy simultaneously. And of course, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in order to understand the complexities of that and the questions of gender and race and caste, etc., etc. All that has to be addressed, but that is a work in progress, I suppose. And I'm not putting my thing into the hat of the Aam Aadmi Party, but